I affirm. Davy 17 defines UBI. UBI is a single payment given by the state to all. Payment is enough for subsistence, supposed to replace all existing income transfers such as benefits, pensions, and food stamps, given to all individuals with supplements for age, disability, but none for short-term events such as illnesses. All income over basic UBI is taxed, estimating a marginal tax rate of 40%. The highest value for this round must be morality because ought entails a moral obligation. The standard is maximizing expected well-being. Prefer it because all public policies lead to trade-offs, meaning policies must be to the overall advantage of society. Wooler 97 writes, public policies entail redistribution of resources. One group's gains comes at another group's expense. Policies must be justified to the public. A priori, moral principles fail to acknowledge trade-offs. Policies makers' duty to the public requires that trade-offs are to the advantage of society. Contention 1 is employment. Subpoint A, automation will make millions of jobs obsolete. Troy et al. 15 writes, our research suggests that 45% of activities individuals are paid to perform can be automated by adapting current technologies in the United States. That represents $2 trillion in annual wages. Even highest paying occupations such as financial managers have a significant amount of activity that can be automated. For further evidence, it does not only look at automating entire jobs, but shows automation reduces the complexity of a job, which means businesses need fewer work hours. And automation is try or die. It can't get any worse because it's a self-accelerating process that will eventually take all sorts of jobs. That means that any neg arguments saying UBI makes automation worse don't matter because it's as bad as it can get. And unemployment has massive economic output. World 15 writes, robotics may trigger mass unemployment and economic collapse. As you eliminate workers, people become unemployed. Wages falls. Consumers will have less purchasing power. There will be less demand. There are concerns about inflation. Subpoint B, UBI is a solution to the crisis. First, Alaska empirically demonstrates that UBI part-time employment. Jones et al. 18 writes, since '82, Alaska residents have yearly cash from the permanent fund. Data from the popular survey and a synthetic control method, the dividend had no effect on employment and increased part-time work by 17%. Prior research suggests that cash transfers decrease labor. Our results as evidence that effects of widespread and permanent transfers tend to offset this effect. Prefer the study. A, recency. This study is most up-to-date research from 2018. B, offer quals. This research is from NBER, which is one of the most respected economic think tanks. C, other studies don't account for the permanence of UBI because they are short-term experiments. Second, even some people drop out of the workforce with UBI, they choose to do so for various good reasons. Dodge 16 writes, the US and Canada commissioned experiments to study UBI breadwinners. Devote more time to staying home with children. Teenagers put off jobs to focus on school, leading to double-digit increases in high school completion. If people did stop working, they contribute to society in other ways. Economic security emboldens people to start businesses and explore new innovations. Prefer this A, sample diversity. These experiments took place across 6 states in the US and 1 province in Canada. B, controls. These experiments controlled for external factors by contrasting with communities that did not receive a UBI. And this has a huge impact. More people freed up from labor creates massive economic returns through innovation. Green Up 15 writes, if you empower every person in a nation with freedom, you unlock an innovation army. You open them up to creativity. You empower them to return to established education and establish whole new industries. Impacts. A, that added innovation can create new jobs and opportunities, mitigating any decrease in labor. B, the new industries produced through entrepreneurship create higher tax revenue, so UBI pays for itself. Contention 2 is poverty. Subpoint A, extreme poverty is high and on the rise. NLIHC 13 writes, 1.65 million American households are living in extreme poverty, including 3.55 million children. Between 1996 and 2011, the number of families living on $2 or less rose from 636,000 to 1.65 million. 90% of poor people are those who cannot work, so UBI is needed. Bring 17 writes, children, elderly, disabled people, and students make about 70% of the poor. If you add careers and those who are already fully employed, the number goes up to 90%. For the most part, the poor are people who cannot and should not work. And the impact is devastating. Poverty and inequality statistically decrease both the quality and duration of life. Sanger Katz 15 writes, evidence suggests that living in a community with high income inequality also seems to be bad for your health. People in unequal communities were more likely to die before the age of 75, even if the average incomes are the same. Subpoint B, UBI is the solution to the problem of poverty. Unlike current welfare, a UBI can circulate around and create a multiplier effect, improving local economies and infrastructure. Kidney 17 writes, bring food from elsewhere and the impact of that food stops with those who eat it. Each dollar provided by cash transfer is circulated 2.59 times around the local economy before being spent elsewhere. After transfer, that household spend more on food, health, and education to non-recipients. They had invested in physical goods. That translated into rising incomes. UBI won't cause inflation because it just moves money that already exists in the economy. Sentitas 14 writes, basic income is not printing $3 trillion every year. The money for a UBI would already exist. It would not be new, just shifted. The value of each dollar has not changed. Even when the money supply is vastly expanded, the effects on prices need not be extreme. For example, the Fed's quantitative easing added $4 trillion. The results were not inflation. Subpoint C, our current welfare programs cannot and will not solve this issue. For 2 reasons. 1, welfare is expensive and de-incentivizes employment due to phase-out benefits. Zawalski 14 writes, welfare programs cost $1 trillion, over $20,000 for every poor person. Poor Americans face phase-out benefits and benefits cliffs that create high marginal tax rates on their labor. Working more doesn't pay. 2, the current welfare state incentivizes businesses with high-paying jobs to move out of poor neighborhoods, effectively segregating the poor. Tanner 15 writes, welfare traps recipients in a cycle of long-term poverty. Only certain providers receive payment through welfare. The poor are forced to live where poverty is concentrated. These areas have fewer economic opportunities. Businesses migrate to areas where consumers have more income. Because a world in which the United States provides a UBI is better than a world without a UBI, you should affirm the resolution.
Great. Cross-examination. Let's come down here so that we can pick up the sound better as we report around.
In Part B of your first contention, you bring up a BREDAT 15 evidence, correct?
In the Part B of my first contention,
Yes, after Dodge.
Yes, after Dodge, it is Green Up 15. That is correct.
All right. Does that cite any? Does GreenDat 15 cite any studies to support his claim?
It is not empirical evidence, but it is analytical evidence, as when you empower every person in the nation, you unlock an innovation army. So it is analytical evidence.
All right. In Part B of your second contention, you say that UBI solves poverty, and you provide cash transfers as the reason for this. How does cash transfers solve poverty?
This proves that a UBI is better than our current welfare programs, and it will help solve poverty better than our current welfare programs because the cash transfers circulate around the economy and improve local economies and infrastructure.
So it's pretty much the trickle-down theory all over again.
Please explain what that is.
That by giving people money, that money will circulate around, helping those both above and both below people. Trickle down.
Yes.
You also say in Part C of your second contention that welfare can't solve it because it costs $1 trillion, correct?
That is a reason, but the main reason is that when people start to get a job in our current welfare programs, the welfare cuts them off and they no longer receive their welfare, and it traps them in a cycle of long-term poverty.
How much would you consider giving everybody with a UBI?
I would consider, with a marginal tax rate of 40%, I would consider $10,000 a year.
How much was everybody in the Alaska study given?
In the Alaska study, they were given $2,072.
A year?
Yes.
In that case, with such wide price differences, how can you claim yet the Alaska study is representative of the entire U.S.?
Because the study is very recent, the authors are very qualified, and the other studies don't account for permanence of UBI, and this study is a long-term study, not a short-term study, and in this long-term study, part-time jobs increased by 17%.
Yes, however, do you have any actual reasons why do you think that it is representative with such a big price difference?
because with such a big price difference, people are still receiving the money that a UBI would give them. And in both worlds, people receive money from a UBI, and the cash difference doesn't matter as they are still receiving money from a UBI, and the offers are very qualified, and the study is a long-term study.
All right, Lucas, you're gonna take some prep time?
Yep.
Make sure you're timing yourself.
I'm fine.
Begin 2 minutes of prep time now. Whenever you're ready. All right. 7 minutes. Begin. I negate the resolution resolved. The United States ought to provide a universal basic income. I agree with my opponent that morality and well-being of most should be the value and value criterion. If I can prove that a universal basic income does not provide the greatest good for the greatest number of people, or further, that it actually does more harm than good, then you should negate the resolution. Contention 1. A UBI increases unemployment. People on unemployment benefits spend less time on work training than recreational activities. IRATSE 19 finds that a Bureau of Labor Statistics study of people on unemployment discovered that they spent more time in front of television and sleeping than upgrading their working skills. Statistics on negative income tax, a variant of UBI, are equally discouraging. Washington made 4 controlled trials involving thousands of people across 6 states. Hours of work desired by all recipients fell 9% below those not in the program. Desired work among single men fell 43% below non-recipients. When those receiving negative income tax lost their jobs, unemployment lasted 2 months longer than with non-recipients. And it gets worse. Studies show that unemployment is detrimental to mental health. A study by Majanovic 17 says that unemployment had a significant influence on mental health of the working age population. The unemployed participants had a significantly poor mental health compared to the employed. A predictor of impaired mental health was job loss. Contention 2. A UBI won't answer a coming crisis, it will create one. Subpoint A, automation will create more jobs than it destroys. My opponent argues that automation will demolish the job market and that UBI solves for this. However, by 2020, automation will create more jobs than it displaces. Shaban 18 says that in the next 4 years, more than 75 million jobs may be lost as companies shift to more automation. However, according to estimates by the World Economic Forum, 133 million new jobs will emerge during this period as businesses develop a new division of labor between humans and machines. In the age of robots, we still need humans to oversee them. Automation won't cause an employment crisis, and we don't need UBI. Instead, this job market will simply shift, leaving the obligation on us to make this transition easier rather than just throwing money at the poor. Subpoint B, a UBI will disincentivize people from looking for jobs. By giving the poor a financial backbone, we disincentivize them from seeking employment, and instead give them the freedom to sit on their couch and watch television, and give them money for that. Annuncia 18 says that a UBI would send exactly the wrong-headed message, reducing people's incentive to work. And it gets worse. Our concept of a dignified life is relative. Getting on by my guaranteed basic income, I will look at my richer, working peers and feel that my lifestyle is not quite dignified. So I will lobby politicians for an increase in UBI. As UBI rises, even fewer people will work, and those who still work will have to be taxed more, and so even fewer people will work, and so on. It's a basic fact of life that no one will ever be happy with their situation. However, throwing money at these people who are in a position to work for this money is not the solution we need. We don't need to put into effect a far-reaching socialist dream scheme. The fact is, in the real world, it won't help. Contention 3. A UBI will cost far too much. One of the largest problems with the UBI is its cost. Jager 13 says that filling out a UBI of $12,000 a year to every citizen would cost taxpayers $3.8 trillion, according to a new study by investment management firm Bridgewater Associates. That's roughly 1/5 of the nation's annual economic production, or 78% of all taxes collected for social programs. Now, in my opponent's first contention, he claims that 48% of jobs will be replaced. Yes, a bunch of jobs will be replaced, but even more jobs will be created. Therefore, that point should be disregarded. In part A of his first contention, he also brings up rural evidence and how automation will cause economic collapse. As I've already stated, more jobs will be created than will be destroyed. Also, Rule cites no evidence. His opinion is merely that, an opinion. It has no evidence for its claims whatsoever. In part B of my opponent's contention, he brings up the Alaska Fund as an example of why a UBI works. To refute that, merely look to my first contention, in which I show that a UBI actually hurts employment. A possible reason for the 17% increase in part-time jobs is that people still had to work for money, as they only had $2,000 a year. A UBI, however, as my opponent stated, would cost $10,000. There's a large difference between that, and the Alaska study is not representative of the entire U.S. My study, however, covers 6 states and is representative. It is also more credible, as it was performed by Washington. Here, in my opponent's second contention, he argues that a UBI will help solve poverty because of cash transfers. He never actually states how cash transfers will help the poor. He only states that cash will circulate around the local economy, improving it. He provides no evidence for this fact, however, and therefore his point should be ignored. He also claims that a UBI won't cause inflation because it doesn't add money to the economy. Inflation isn't caused by adding money to the economy. It is caused by more money circulating around. Giving people money will cause more money to circulate around and therefore cause inflation. In part C, where he says welfare can't solve poverty, one of his warrants for this is that welfare costs $1 trillion. As I already stated, a UBI would cost $3.8 trillion, much more than current welfare. He also claims that poor are forced to live in poor areas. Yes, that may be correct. However, they are still capable of finding jobs and seeking employment. because a UBI will hurt America's poor, harm the mental health of the unemployed, and cost far too much to be practical, I urge you to negate the resolution.
Very good. Okay, so next we have cross-examination. Both of you come in front of the projector so that Michael's iPad can pick up the sound. Whenever you're ready, Michael, go ahead and ask your first question.
In your last contention, you said a UBI will cost far too much. But is that the gross cost of a UBI or the net cost of a UBI that you calculated?
The net cost.
How did you calculate it?
Well, $10,000 or $12,000 in this case to every U.S. citizen, which is 300 million. Multiply that out, you get 3 trillion. This calculates for $12,000 a year, so that 0.8 trillion may be cut in your proposal.
But that is the gross cost. You're simply multiplying the base cost by how many people there are. It is not the net cost of a UBI. And the net cost would be far lower. Alright, also, in your first contention, you said that unemployment hurts mental health. Do you have any explanation for this?
Yes, in a study by Majovnovic, 817, it is stated that unemployment had a significant influence on mental health of the working age population. The unemployed participants had a significantly poorer mental health compared to the employed.
Okay, thank you.
A predictor of
Thank
impaired
you very
mental health
much.
was job loss.
So, do you agree
Which-
do you agree to my definition of UBI?
Yes.
Okay. Do you agree that a marginal tax rate taxes the rich a lot more than it taxes the poor?
Yes. Unfairly so.
Alright. And do you agree that when you're taxing the rich more to provide for UBI, that it helps the poor?
No.
Okay. So, also in your second contention, subpoint B, do you have a warrant for why UBI do you have an empirical warrant for your empirical claim of UBI disincentivizes people to find jobs?
Yes. My evidence in my first contention for a decrease in employment also works for my second contention's point.
Okay. Did you, in your case, did you ever say UBI will cause automation to be worse?
Would you please repeat the question?
Anywhere in your case, did you say that a UBI will cause automation to be worse?
Yes.
Where?
I state that more jobs will be created as a result of automation. It's just that a UBI will disincentivize people from learning the new skills that they will acquire for those new jobs.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any replacement for our current welfare or a UBI in your case?
No.
And do you agree that you conceded that poverty is increasing with welfare helping them, so do you agree there's fundamentally something wrong with our welfare system?
No. The measures we use to measure poverty measure the income of the poor. This does not account for the many welfare benefits, even though the poor might still have the same income.
That's fine. Michael. Whenever you're ready, Michael.
Start prep. Stop time.
How much did you use, Michael?
I used 247.
247. The 4 minutes for the next meeting. Whenever you're ready, sir.
All right. I will defend my own case and then attack my opponent's case.
Okay.
All right. Start time. So in my case, my opponent argued against my automation by saying that automation will create many jobs. But as I said in my own case, a UBI will create a lot of jobs because a UBI will empower people with freedom. And when the people are empowered with freedom, you'll create an army of innovators, and these innovators will open up new industries, so a UBI will create more jobs than before. My opponent also said that more jobs will be created than destroyed with automation, but he has no evidence for this. And also, it's an empirical claim without an empirical evidence, as there were no studies done about automation creating jobs. And once again, a UBI will create more jobs in its very own existence, and with the more jobs created, a UBI will help boost productivity and help the poor more. My opponent also says that my Alaska study isn't suitable evidence because it only gave $2,000, but this study would only build upon itself with more money that they are gaining. And he argued with his empirical evidence against my empirical evidence, but my empirical evidence was a long-term study. It was done by very qualified authors, and it was a very recent, up-to-date in 2018. So therefore, my study is better qualified than his studies are. I will now go on to attacking. Oh wait, never mind. So in my contention 2, my opponent said that a multiplier effect won't help the poor, but the multiplier effect will help fund the UBI, and the UBI will help the poor, as stated in my other contentions. And a multiplier effect will help the poor because of the 40% marginal tax rate. It comes from the 2.59 times multiplier effect. And that's not even in counting innovation. So taxes would be even lower when UBI causes more jobs due to the innovation that it causes. So a UBI will fund itself because of the multiplier effect and the innovations it creates. My opponent also conceded that the poor are segregated, but he said the poor can still find jobs. But with the poor being segregated and our current welfare programs being cut off when the poor get a job, the poor cannot find jobs as their welfare will be cut off and they're very segregated. And when the welfare cuts off and they have a job, they do not have enough money to sustain themselves, so they go back into poverty and they have to quit their job and go back into the welfare system. So it's a cycle of long-term poverty. I will now go on to attacking my opponent's case. So in my opponent said that people on UBI are lazy, but he's saying that people are lazy either way with a UBI or not a UBI, and he has no warrant to explain. He has no empirical warrant to explain why people are lazy without a UBI or with a UBI, and this matters because it is an empirical claim, so therefore you shouldn't use it. My opponent also said that a UBI costs far too much, but as stated in my definition, and within my multiplier effect, a UBI will help fund itself with new innovations, and only a marginal tax rate of 40% can fund a UBI alone. And also we could create a carbon emissions tax, which will help save the environment, and it'll create lots of money, like $1 trillion per year. Now, my opponent also said that a UBI will, in his contention 2, a UBI will cause people to be lazy and not adapt. But once again, his only evidence for this is a study done in his contention 1, but this isn't good evidence, as my studies in Alaska was done a lot more recently and it increased part-time jobs. So you should vote affirmative because a UBI will help the poor and it will help it'll help deal with automation, so you should vote affirmative.
Thank you. Lucas, you have 2 minutes of rap time remaining. Whenever you're ready, go ahead and vote.
Alright, I will protect my own case, then move on to attack my opponents. Begin. First of all, I'd like to restate my opponent's burden. To prove that a UBI will succeed, he must prove that first, we are able to afford it and that the US government can pay for it. And second, he must prove that it helps the poor. If he fails in either of these arguments, you should vote negative. Now, onto my case. First of all, he attacks my Razzi 19 evidence, saying that it has no evidence. It does. It cites a study from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the federal government. I believe that that does count as empirical evidence, therefore his attack should be disregarded. Second, he claims that my Shaban 18 evidence doesn't have any evidence. Once again, it does. It cites statistics from the World Economic Forum. On my second contention in Part B, he claims that my study isn't quite as reliable as his. It is. And my Razzi 19 evidence, it is performed across 6 states, meaning that it outweighs his study in magnitude. It also outweighs his in credibility, as while his Alaska study is done by universities, my study is performed by the federal government. He also claims, in response to my saying it costs too much in my third contention, that a UBI will fund itself and that a carbon emissions tax can pay for it. I will get back to a UBI funding itself later when I attack his case. Now, he says that a carbon emissions tax will pay for it. First off, he doesn't elaborate on how it could. However, I believe that what he means is taxing emissions from coal power plants will fund it. There are several things wrong with this. First off, shouldering the main burden of UBI onto power plants will cause the electrical industry to crash, leading to many power plants going out of business. As our modern day world relies on electricity, that would be a terrible thing, and therefore the carbon emissions tax should be disregarded. Even if coal power plants can afford it, however, they will not react the same. If we do instate such a hefty carbon emissions tax, coal power plants will change their pollution policies. They will make sure that they will decrease the amounts of pollution. Therefore, while that might be good for the economy, carbon emissions tax would no longer be able to fund a UBI. Now, onto my opponent's case. First off, in response to my attack on Part A of his first contention, he claims that a UBI will create more jobs than it destroys due to innovators. His innovators' point is, as I said, pure speculation. It has no empirical evidence backing it up and therefore should be disregarded. As response to my saying his Alaska fund isn't as credible as mine, he claimed that due to the differences in money, it shouldn't be regarded as evidence for the entirety of the U.S. He claims that adding more money to a UBI would lead to just a better results. It would lead to a worse result. And he also claims that since his Alaska study was longer and more credible, it's better. However, as for the credibility, my study is performed by the U.S. federal government, where his is only performed by several random universities. In response to him saying that his outweighs in time frame, mine, while I do not have time frame, mine outweighs in magnitude, as it studies 6 states instead of just 1. In response to my questioning his cash transfer, he brings up how it will increase the amounts of innovation. However, he fails to say how cash transfers will support the poor. Therefore, he in Part B of his second contention should be disregarded. He also fails to address my attacking his inflation point. Therefore, we can conclude that a UBI will cause inflation, hurting the economy even further. He fails to respond to my cost analysis of the UBI. Therefore, we can conclude that a UBI will cost $3.8 trillion. the majority of the U.S. budget. The federal government will in no way be able to afford a UBI while still maintaining other programs such as defense. Now, finally, in response to him saying that poor won't be able to find jobs, that might be so. However, they can live off of welfare. A UBI, you can't say quite the same. Now, my opponent, in my case, I give you solid evidence for why a UBI would cost far too much, leading the federal government into debt if it did fund it, and I also give reasons for why a UBI will cause unemployment and hurt America's poor. As I stated earlier, because my opponents must prove that both a UBI is affordable and that it will help its poor. As he fails to address either of these, you should vote negative.
Michael, 1 minute and 13 seconds of track time remaining. Let me know when you're ready and I'll call.
Start time.
Michael, whenever you're ready.
4-minute speech.
3.
Okay. So, I will defend and weigh and extend my own arguments, and then go on to my opponent's arguments. So it's AC and C.
Okay.
Right.
Cool.
Start time. So in my opponent's last case, he said that I failed to prove why a UBI can be funded, but I did not fail to show why a UBI can be funded. I showed that a marginal tax rate of 40% can fund a UBI, and carbon emission taxes will help. And I concede that a carbon emission tax is a terrible idea. But with that argument out of the way, still, a marginal tax rate of 40% on its own can help pay for a UBI, and it will not crash the economy, and it will not cause inflation as it's circulating money that already exists. My opponent also says that I failed to prove why a UBI will help the poor, but my entire contention too shows why a UBI will help the poor. And the value criterion for this round is utilitarianism. So all I have to do, judges, all I have to do for this round is prove why a UBI will help the poor a lot more than our current welfare programs. And I proved that our current welfare programs de-incentivizes the poor to work, as once they get a job, the welfare cuts them off. And my opponent conceded that once people get jobs under our current welfare programs, they have enough money to work. And also, my opponent said that welfare is enough to live under, but no, it is not. Welfare only ensures that people don't die, but you can't live only off of a welfare system. So his argument is false that welfare is enough to live off of. Well, my argument, a UBI will be enough to live off of, it will both increase productivity by causing new innovations, which will help boost the economy and help the poor. And it will also give the poor money, a lot more money than our current welfare programs, which will help them sustain their lives, and they can spend the money on whatever they want, unlike our current welfare programs, which will help boost the poor. Also, our UBI will help fund itself because of the multiplier effect and the marginal tax rate of 40%, which only taxes the multiplier effect according to the studies. According to how 40% times 2.59 is, it's what? So, yeah, okay, I will now go on. Oh, also, my Alaska case outweighs his case about how a UBI doesn't incentivize work, because the authors are extremely qualified, and they're not just some random universities. It's from a very reliable economic think tank, and yeah, it outweighs his. I will now go on to attacking my opponent's case. My opponent did nothing to prove our current welfare programs are better than a UBI. All he said, he contended that our welfare programs is a massive de-incentivizer. All he said is our welfare programs are enough to live under, which I have already proven as false, as it isn't enough to live under. It's just barely enough to help the poor not die. So judges, you should affirm the resolution, because a UBI will help the people a lot more than our current welfare programs, and the negative gives no other reasons for why a UBI, no other reasons to help the poor, unlike our current welfare programs, and our current welfare programs are bad and UBI is good, so you should affirm.
Very good. Very good job. You both are obviously worked very hard. What I ask you to do now, the student panel, take a minute and figure out who you're going to vote for. Don't talk to one another. Remember, the most important thing about judging is making an independent decision, right? Zion is going to come around and he is going to collect the student vote, and he will go ahead and count up the votes for each person. Then after he's done doing that, when the four judges, the four other lab judges are ready, Drew will go, Zion can tell Drew there is the student vote count, and then once the lab judges submit their ballots online, Drew will go ahead and disclose who won this final round. Yes, Michael?
Do I continue recording?
Yeah, go ahead and record it, sure. Why
So,
not?
until like everyone gives their decisions?
You can stop it for, well, no, keep recording. You can go ahead and record the decision. You don't have to record the RFP. But all of you kids, if this is an example of what you all have learned, that's pretty impressive. Very, very good round. Fun tournament. I think that both of you have a very bright future in the activity, right? I'm looking for big things from both of you as you progress through high school. It should be a lot of fun. For those of you as well that are going to be in high school next year that aren't going to be joining us at Straight Jesuit, you'll see the Straight Boys at tournament. You'll see me at tournament. One of the fun things that I have happen every year when I go to tournament is to have No Limits kids come up to me and tell me how their season is going. And so certainly, if you see us at a tournament, stop in and check in, all right? As well, if you need any advice during the course of the year, certainly any one of the kids on the Straight Jesuit team, as well as myself or anybody that works here, will provide some advice. If you're going to be in middle school next year, then, you know, and you want to know what tournaments are available for middle school kids, certainly, you know, you can contact us and we'll let you know. They should all be on Joy of Tournaments, right? joyoftournaments.com. Just by a show of hands for the kids, the campers, did you like the tournament? If you liked it and you think that we should keep doing, because we didn't have a camp tournament for LD last year. We just had lab and then we selected a couple of kids to be in the demo round. If you think that we should continue having the camp tournament, raise your hand. It looks like, yeah. It looks like you all had pretty fun with the camp tournament. That's good. That's kind of what I thought. And I honestly think that you'll probably learn more from going to debating than you do just sitting in class, right? When you're put on the spot and you're forced to debate, you learn more from that than you would otherwise. So next year, try to go to as many tournaments as you can, right? Because that'll help you learn and help you do better. We'll let Drew know what the student vote count was.
Is that everybody?
Shouldn't we wait? I think he's got.
Just make sure everybody's ballots are in before we.
Well, he's gonna just whisper it to Drew what the student count is, and then Drew will announce the decision.
I said, yeah, I'm still making my decision, but once everyone's done theirs on tab and I have his, I'll announce it. And we'll give an RFP.
Kind of interesting with Michael. Michael is debate alum and faculty member J.P. Stucker's brother, and then Lucas is Straight Jesuit faculty member. Jacob White, Jacob Walker, his little brother as well. So that's you can throw those away. You just tell Drew what the vote count is, but don't say it out loud. Just hold it up. And did you guys, all of you kids, did you see? I think that I had Anson post online where you can see your ballot from the tournament. Are they online? Did anybody look at them? They're online, so you can go through and read the comments that each one of your judges made for you in each one of your rounds. I think probably, you guys, one of the most important things about getting better in the activity is being honest about your performance, right? Recognizing what you did well and what you didn't do so well, so that you can work on those things that you need to work on during the week in between tournaments, right? So many times, because you know, you have a pretty subjective perspective when you're debating, it's tempting to just say, you know, I didn't win because the judge was not very smart or the judge was bad, right? But if you do that, if you do that, you're not giving yourself the opportunity to improve, right? You have to be critical. You have to think about what it was that you could have done better. You have to read the comments from the judges on the ballot, listen to what they say when they provide you an oral critique, then take action during the week to correct the problems that you have. Right? So that when you, because if you just go out every weekend and do the same thing over and over again, you're not really going to improve. Right? So I think that we always have debaters that just use the same cases every time and don't rewrite contentions or arguments that don't work. And they go out and, you know, they don't improve each week. Are we ready?
No, I'm still looking at the study.
All right, you gotta hurry. This isn't rocket science. You've gotta make a decision. Everybody else turn theirs in other than Bruce. I guess we should be grateful that Drew was very thoughtful in his consideration. Who got to semis in here? Who were the kids that got to semis? Raise your hand. The semis kids are here?
We had
Zubair?
and that sophomore who has to take PO.
All right. That's still really impressive. How many of you broke in here? Stand up if you broke. That's impressive. How long is, how many, is this your very first debate tournament?
I did PF last year.
Did you? All right. How about you? Is it your first one? How about you? First one? That's really good. First one? All right. That's really good. That's impressive. And this is pretty, I think this is pretty typical of what a debate tournament would be like, right? There are probably about 40 kids, right, entered. I think probably we had, better judges, right? But I think that, so when you go, you'll compete in novice, and it'll be pretty,
Drew, your judging career is not on the line. You can
Pretty,
make a decision.
I know, but I want to make a fair
He
decision.
wants to
I don't
make
wanna
a fair
just text all the
decision.
judges and decide the same thing. I want to actually
No.
go
For whoever you vote. Drew, just vote for whoever you think won.
I am. I'm looking at the evidence, though.
So you don't have to.
You don't vote off of just I feel like you won. You're evaluating the argument.
You can look at my RFD. Drew, it's not just I feel like you won.
It's not rocket science.
Let's talk about, sometimes I think with younger judges, you vote for who you think your friends will vote, think you should vote for. We don't want you to do that. That's why I always tell you, and I tell my students, that you should vote for who you thought won without any interference from somebody else. Right? You know. Also, when you debate practice rounds in practice, guys,
I know I said.
I think that, are you ready?
Do you know the student vote, Drew?
No, Zon, do you have the student vote?
Oh, yeah.
And keep your RFPs
All right.
to a limit.
So congratulations to both debaters on a 3-2 decision. The affirmative won today's debate.
Very close round.
Yeah.
So you were
I squirreled. So the student.